Co.
Start.
Hey.
Con.
Ver. Send.
Shen.
And that's it. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 4 of Let's CoStaRt a Conversation. My name is David Tran. I am one of your heads today, and our cohort is made up of VSA members across the entire Midwest region, and we serve to be an active voice or participant in the regional and local VSA community. Last time we were here, we talked about standing together within your own community. And today, we're going to talk about something a little bit more externally, and how to be more thinking outside the box and how to be an ally and stand in solidarity amongst others in our communities. So as I mentioned, my name is David. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Michigan CoSR, and I actually just got back from my internship in San Jose, California. Super hot, by the way, and super excited also to be back on campus at Michigan State University. And unfortunately, looking forward to my final year here on campus, as sad as it seems, but we got to move on, right? But we're going to go out with a bang as well. So bring it back over to my next person, Maya. How's it going?
Hi, David. Yeah, good to see you again. And I just want to say your San Jose adventures on your social media looked so fun. It looked like such a fun little thing.
Oh my gosh.
So that was awesome. And I feel you on like that senioritis. It's also my last year and I have many feelings. But yeah, hi guys, it is Maya Powers. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the Illinois CoSR, and I'm from UIC, the University of Illinois at Chicago. And I'm glad to be back on another episode. And I guess with me, so yeah, like I said, I'm starting up my senior year at UIC, and I actually got a new job in nightlife recently, which is so fun. So I'm really excited for all the new things to come. Yeah, how about you, James?
Thanks, Maya. I'm James. I prefer him as pronouns. I'm the CoSR from Minnesota. This summer, I've just been attending events from our sibling regions, the most recent one being the Mid-Atlantic camp out of our sibling Mid-Atlantic region. And I'm looking forward to just doing more of the same, transitioning into the fall. And this will be my first time speaking during our podcast. So yeah, excited to be here.
I'm so excited. I got a little premature with that excitement, but welcome so much, James. We're so glad to have you. And for those who do not know, James has been a very long time VSA member in our community. So we thank him for all he's done. And also he's kind of a popular person. So like, if you see him, give him a shout out. He's like one of those like people that you see in the airport, he kind of like hides away. But you gotta like find him, like, James, come over here. Like paparazzi him, right? So I love it. So, well, in that regard, we started this podcast in order to create a safe space for us to talk about life, school, community, identity, and everything in between. We want to use this platform as a way to empower each other's narratives and at the same time, destigmatize what it means to be Vietnamese, Asian American, or just a person going through life in general. Hopefully y'all can resonate with our stories and vibe with us at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, for the listeners who always listen, just want to remind you guys of our disclaimers, and for our new listeners, definitely there are trigger warnings. Keep in mind that the stuff we talk about here in this podcast is pretty heavy, and not all of our experiences and views reflect UVSA-Midwest as a whole, but more or less reflect our own individual perspectives. And also some trigger warnings for today's episode include stereotypes, harassment, implicit bias, experiences of discrimination. So keep an ear out for those things.
Got to keep an ear, y'all. That's how you listen. But thank you so much, Maya. Today, more specifically, we'll be talking about solidarity in others' communities, what it means to be an ally, how to be a supportive fellow for communities around us, and at the same time, getting resources and advice from the cohort on how we can continue to be present and aware in not only our own communities, but for others as well. So to top it off, we'd like to give it back to James. So James, I want to ask, what does it mean to be an ally? Like, what is solidarity? Like, these are very big words for some people. So like, how would you define that?
Yeah, so I would just start with allyship being defined as a baseline as an active and consistent practice of evaluation and reevaluation in which a person holding systemic power seeks to end oppression and solidarity with a group of people who are systemically disempowered. And I think a question that comes up a lot is the difference between allyship and solidarity. And I have my thoughts, but I'll open it up to you two first if you have any thoughts.
You know, I love how you throw it back at me. I'm stumped. When I think about solidarity, I think about multiple things. Like it is definitely something that is like something that you do. It's very action like, you know, solidarity can look like you're stepping up for somebody in like your school, or like solidarity can look like you're joining a part of like a bigger collaborative where you're being able to help others, but also fighting for something that is right. That's like something that I kind of think of firsthand. But like, Maya, do you have anything that you think about in solidarity?
Yeah, that's a really good question, James, and I hope I can articulate this the best I can. But I feel like solidarity, the connotation is definitely more, I would say, more involved. I feel like somebody who shows solidarity is somebody who, like, you know, takes accountability, somebody who actually, you know, steps up to truly support a community and stand in unity with a community, versus I think allyship is, I guess, really easy. It's a lot more easy to be an ally than it is to like be in solidarity. Solidarity requires a little bit more extra like work, I guess. Where allyship, you can kind of just be an ally from the sidelines. But I think solidarity is, you know, that next step, I would say.
Yeah, honestly, like there's so many definitions of thinking about it, but like honestly, like is well, not answer the question, but like to kind of bring that question back to you, James, is that like, is there like a certain like definition for solidarity in your eyes?
Yeah. To me, it's not so much an exact definition, but Maya and David, you mentioned it. To me, it's kind of about space. I see solidarity as more as a state of being, showing up at a rally at a space that isn't yours. Whereas allyship kind of takes it a little bit further. It's an action. You're active. You're showing up, mobilizing, collecting resources, etc. And yeah.
I like how you say that. So then, like, you know, with these definitions, you know, could you explain to us like why is that important now? Like, why is it like now in 2021 that like this is so relevant and so important versus like in history's past?
Mm-hmm. I think of it in terms of impacts to people in our community. So I'll just go to a survey by the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. According to the 2019 National Climate Survey, 9 out of 10 LGBTQ students experience harassment, not surprising. And then heard in that with an intersectional lens, 2 out of 5 AAPI LGBTQ students experience both anti-LGBTQ and racial harassment. That's not great. We need to do better. And yeah, my takeaway from this is these experiences lead to, you know, more missed school, lower GPAs, lower self-esteem. So just overall poor educational outcomes and worse overall psychological well-being. So yeah, a more open and more liberal atmosphere empowers and uplifts them, hopefully.
Yeah, I definitely, these statistics are just like, I'm shook right now. Like it's
staggering.
Yeah, it is, right? And like honestly, if you think about it, like it's surprising to see how like, you know, because we're in this position that like, you know, the LGBTQ plus community, as we spoke in like our past episodes, is that it is also a marginalized community where like they face their struggles. However, if you're double dipped into a situation that you are also, you know, for example, Asian American, but then also an LGBT plus community member, you pretty much double dip into yourself where like, you know, as you see here in the statistics that like it gets much more worse. And like it shows that like, you know, that there is something that systematically needs to be changed. And then like it's also very appalling. Like I don't know how to kind of like wrap my head around this right now, because like it's scary. Like it really is scary. Like the fact that you identify yourself to be something certain and like you're comfortable with it, but then end up having negative results from it. And like the data here shows that like something needs to be working with this.
Yeah, it's definitely it's really heavy to think about, but I'm sure that a lot of us, we do identify ourselves with communities that are marginalized, like being a person of color or being like a woman or being a part of the LGBT community. We find ourselves in these like vulnerable communities, but I want to ask you guys, like, how about the communities that you're not necessarily a part of, right? Because this is what this podcast episode is about. Like, how do we show support for communities that we're not a part of and that we might not have a connection to? Um, but how do we show that solidarity? Because it's important, the way I like to think about it is if we're going to fight for our own social justice issues, like let's say for example, if I'm identify as Latina, if I want to really fight for Latino social justice, I can't really fight for Latino social justice without also fighting for Asian American social justice and African American
Mhm.
social justice. So it really is connected. So I guess like I'll start off with like some of my solidarity and allyship. A lot of you guys know that I do not identify as an Asian person. I am mixed. I am half Mexican and half like white American. My dad is of Irish descent. But I have found myself in predominantly Asian American spaces. I don't know how it happened, but I'm really involved in obviously UVSA-Midwest.
We
And
love you, don't worry.
yeah. Oh my gosh, I love you guys. Yeah. No, also Alpha Kappa Delta Phi, which is my Asian interest sorority. It's actually the largest Asian interest sorority internationally. And then, I've always just been a part of other predominantly Asian American spaces, like other Asian student orgs. And I was really active in this nonprofit organization, which is like Korean based called Hana Stunner, but it like just provides social services for the Asian American and I guess like people of color like community in Chicago. But anyway, being somebody who doesn't identify as Asian but still being present in these spaces, I try to be very intentional and think about the space that I take up. So yeah, I'm in a lot of these leadership roles, right? But I always ask myself, like, how much space should I be taking up when these leadership roles are meant for, these leadership roles might be meant to uplift like Vietnamese American students, right? So I am very critical of like the space I take up in these leadership roles. And I also, things I try to do is I try to be a good listener. I always try to center, the voices that are here, that's what's important in this space. And I want to really support that. And I guess like another thing that I also try to do is I try to learn the history because I think it's really important to learn other people's histories. I never really thought like, what do I benefit from knowing Vietnamese American history? Like you actually benefit a lot from it. And I found that, I'm a global Asian studies minor, and I found that I've learned so much about my own identity and my own history through Asian American studies. Like everything is so interconnected. So just being there to learn somebody else's history is a huge first step to like, understanding decolonized history. So those are just some of the
We
things I do. But how about you guys? Do you have any experiences with that or?
Can I just say retweet to those words that you just said? The last sentence just hit me like a new one. But no, honestly, like I get that. Like I really get that. Because like for me, right? So like something that's kind of takes back for historical context is that I identify as like Vietnamese American. However, my upbringing was actually in an Arab American community, which is in a predominantly city called Dearborn, Michigan. So it's a little bit not too far from Detroit, about 15 minutes west. And I will say that like I have a very similar feeling, like for me, I've always kind of found myself in like a predicament that like I wasn't able to kind of reach out. So like for example, like you're from Chicago, so like you have such like vast areas where like you can kind of explore multiple identities and like multiple cultures and religions and whatnot. Where for me, I came from like a space that was like very like homogeneous. So like there wasn't a lot of diversity for me to kind of like explore, right? So for me, it was like, how do I become this ally to like the Arab American community? Because definitely too, what I also consider that its historical context is that there's always a lot of miscommunication. Like no one understands why like this person does this. No one understands like why they follow these traditions. And like it's always like people kind of looking back at each other and saying, why do you do that? Like it's weird. And like people like kind of hash back at each other, right? But for me, it was like kind of taking that step back, being observant and kind of thinking it's like, the Islamic culture and also the Arab American culture, more specifically Mediterranean, it's very beautiful when you look into it, right? But I think it's always like this outcast that like we hear from other people. They're like, oh, well, it's very like savage or like things like that. Like it's just like not like our way. But however, it's like if we're here in spaces where like we're gonna be mingling with these people as human beings and also like we want to be able to kind of sit here, understand where they're coming from, their perspectives, and also be able to voice their concerns as well. Because when you think about, like you said, Maya, right, you were able to visit your own identity from studying Asian American history and like also their identities too. And you never would have thought right that. So like it's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah, retweet. It's like it's crazy enough, but sometimes you have to explore in order to find oneself and also to understand yourself even further. So I definitely think that like for me, like I was able to kind of sit in with like my colleagues from my high school and be able to like study the Islamic culture, Islamic traditions, culture, and religion itself, which is very beautiful, by the way. If you ever have the chance to read, the Quran is amazing. And also like how people do things, what like their beliefs are. It was able to help kind of like define myself and like what I believed in as well, but also kind of gave me an understanding and perspective. So now that I go to university, I'm not only just thinking about the Asian American side, I'm thinking about like the Latinx side, the Arab American side, the African American side. It's like all these perspectives. And then when you really think about it, we are all essentially kind of like one and all together. We're all facing very similar struggles, but it's when we unite that is like makes it very powerful, honestly.
Yeah, I think, our communities have a lot of differences, but our communities have a lot of similarities. And for a lot of our communities, there's the same common enemy. That same common enemy is, white supremacy, capitalism, genocide, colonization, imperialism, war, militarization. Like those are like we all share the common enemy, and I think it's really important to kind of take a step back and realize that.
I know, honestly. And like I know this is like something that's kind of recent in news, but if you all have ever kind of watched the situation in Afghanistan, I know it's a little bit sensitive, but just a little warning for everyone. We're talking about, incarcerated people and also people that are refugees. But if you all have noticed, there's some things going on with Afghanistan, especially with the Taliban taking over like the capital. And there was this recently very interesting is that during some people photographized how like people were escaping Afghanistan. And what was very, very intriguing is that they put a before and then picture and they basically compared the Vietnam War during the fall of Saigon with how Afghanistan was going. And like when I saw those two pictures, I was just like, you know, people may have our differences, but like in different in timelines, we have similar problems. Like we've all wanted to escape at some point. We've all wanted to like kind of like overcome our hardships and be able to like find a new world to like escape and like start a new life. So it's like, rather than just hating on something for what's going on, it's like kind of understand where they're coming from because you never know. Your group that you are part of may have also went through that as well. So I think it's a lot of resignation that we need to kind of like think about when we're thinking about these things.
Yeah. Also, I'll just add one quick bit. I don't want to derail too much.
You're
But
good.
some of the empowering history that I've also learned through taking like Latino studies courses and global Asian studies courses at UIC is that I guess like for example, kind of like how you talked about how the situation going on in Afghanistan is not the same, but could be compared to the situation in Vietnam in the 70s, and that could be something that could unite those two communities. And something that I learned is like the first implementation of like illegal immigration and policing immigration in America ever that first started with the Chinese Exclusion Act, with the Chinese community. And if you fast forward to now, it's a very, illegal immigration is a really, really big issue right now for Mexicans. And so knowing that, we share that history, we've all, it's a different timeline, but our
Right.
communities have been there, and there's that as well. So I think that's really
Yeah.
empowering to realize.
No, and honestly, sister, honestly, I agree with you. Like it's like literally history repeats itself in different areas that we never think of. And like honestly, that wasn't even derailing. Like honestly, I think it's important for you to recognize that because it is a huge problem right now. And like what we need to do is focus on that issue because like people don't realize it, but like illegal immigration, like we are supposed to be more open to people that are coming in, and like people are trying to escape certain hardships, and like if we've done it for people in the past, why can't we do it now? So it's like it doesn't matter like what ethnicity, like we definitely need to recognize that like the Latinx community is definitely struggling right now too, because back then the Chinese Inclusion Act, like you said, very similar things. So like I think it's important that we recognize this history. And it's also honestly, I love how you brought it up because like it's definitely something that like people sometimes like look past. Even like people in like Asian American space too, like they're just like, well, they don't deserve to come here. It's like, well, then back then, your ancestors used to also want to come here too, but they had the same issue. So it's kind of like telling them that like this has happened to you too. So why are you being like the opposite end? I see James over here just like intaking all this right now. It's crazy. Well, hopefully I didn't like over startle you, James. It's just very
No,
intense conversation.
you're okay. All of that resonates, David, especially your experience at university, and history in general, just learning about it, all that is important. Learning the history of our own movement, understanding where we've been is important towards navigating where we're going.
Yeah.
And I guess in terms of my own experiences, the main lessons I've learned is just understanding my own capacity to be an ally, asking to reverse, for example, centuries of racism. That's a lot, but understanding that you don't have to move heaven and earth all at once. I may, for example, have the privilege and capacity to be on the ground at protests, taking care of other people's needs, but others may not, and that's okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pathways. Yeah, like
I get it. I really get it, James. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But I definitely think you just hit into like at a beautiful point that like it's okay not to know things, and like that's why we're here. Like we mentioned earlier, it's a safe space for everyone. Like I think a lot of people kind of feel that like they need to know everything and like everything, but it's really not the case sometimes too. I think it's also being that brave, confident person and asking yourself, I don't know this stuff. Can you please teach me? And like how do we learn to be like a solidarity ally to like folks that are not in our community? Like for example, if I ask Maya, it's like, Maya, I really don't know the Latinx community as well. Like how can I best support you? And asking community members like what can we do to help? Because like it's one thing to kind of do something and then like assume that it's gonna help them, but it's another thing when you directly ask them in person and say, or virtually in this case, it's like, what can I do to help? How can I support you? And then from there, you can really establish that connection. So honestly, James, warm my heart. But
Yeah.
snaps to that, snap.
Thank you. I'll just add that like, yeah, you think of advocacy, you might think of like being there in person, but no, there's policy, there's affecting policy, like with voting. Everyone can vote. There's philanthropy, community engaged learning. Yeah, there's just a lot of different pathways towards engagement for everyone. You don't have to do everything.
What I'm hearing is Maya is James win for governor. Yes. Do I hear this? I think Minnesota would love you. Yeah. I'd move over for him. But that being said, we're gonna move right into our halftime break. We're gonna give you guys a little water, hydrate check, please. Go wash the dishes, whatever you gotta do. If you're finishing your bike ride, give a stop, take a breather. But us in the car will be right back after a couple minutes of us taking a break. And then in the next up things, we're gonna talk about how to be an ally and how not to be an ally. It's the do's and don'ts of allyship. But stay with us. Okay, and welcome back to Let's CoStaRt a Conversation. My name is David Chan. I am one of your hosts, along with Maya Powers and James Lin. last we were earlier talking about was talking about solidarity in other communities. We talked a whole big deal in the first half, and now it's getting time to get to the nitty gritty of the second half and more realistic things on what we can do as allies in standing in solidarity. So, James and Maya, I want to ask you. So, when I ask you what an ally is and what a good ally looks like and what a not good ally looks like, hope that makes sense. Yeah, what a good ally sounds like. So, when I say a good ally, what's like the first thing that comes into your head?
I guess for me, it would definitely be a good ally is somebody who kind of understands that allyship and ally work isn't a trend, it's not temporary, it's something that you have to dedicate. You have to be down for it forever, you know, ally work never is over. And
Mhm.
I feel like I've seen a lot of I've thought a lot about this, especially, you know, for example, like when the BLM movement was like at its peak during COVID, and there was like that trend where people would just upload black squares on their Instagrams to show solidarity, and there's a lot of people in my own community that did that, and I think that that form of allyship is really interesting to me. I think it's like, okay, I could go on about how I personally don't, you know, like those social media trends. I think that they're not super effective. Okay, whatever. But that's the whole idea of like people taking allyship, you know, seeing it as a trend, like it's only important right now because everybody's talking about it on Twitter. But then like 5 months from now, or like 5 months from now, they stop posting about BLM. They stop retweeting about BLM, you know. And that's not what true allyship, true solidarity looks like. It's something you always have to be having that conversation all the time. Not just when all your friends are talking about it. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's very performative, very
Performative.
that's
conditional.
the
So
word. That is the word.
That is the
Yes,
word.
performative. The bird is the word. Anyways, yes, performative is the word. Definitely, understanding that like, what you're doing, work should never stop and it should always be ongoing. Again, always being active and present as much as it is like draining for some folks, which we understand. Always remember that like the work is never done. So yeah, that was a great point, Maya. Dang, that was you hit right on the spot. So how about you, James? So like, what do you think in your like eyes like a good ally looks like?
yeah, so I'll just quickly add to Maya's point. For my workplace, we're starting to have more workshops, just on various topics, and we can't just have like one or like three workshops and then call it good. You always have to bring them back because these uh, movements change, lessons change, so you always have to come back to it. But as far as what comes to mind for me, I think mm, standing standing beside and not before, I think is important with your allies, or with being an ally.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and to elaborate, it's like you're not standing in front of them and like speaking for them or anything. You're giving them their platform. You're being their friend, their champion, their advocate. You're not speaking on their behalf. You're there with them, but not. But yeah, you're there with them, but you're there. Am I making sense?
Yes, you are. I was just trying to take it in and all that. I was just like,
Yeah.
let me think. But I think like a question I have is like, and let me know if I'm wrong, but it's more of like if I was in a setting that like I'm in a university and let's say like my friend is like a certain ethnicity and then like there's like a certain conversation and all of a sudden that like when they're speaking, I should not be the one that's speaking for them. Be like, oh, my friend here is like, for example, like Latinx. So like I know what they're going on. It's more of like you sit there, you kind of like are on the sidelines, but when they're speaking, you support and you empower their voice. And it kind of like amplifying what they're saying with them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Be there with me, but be there for me as well, is what I was trying to say.
Okay, that
Of
makes sense.
course. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, that's a great way of honestly saying it because like I know like for some people, it's very hard to understand it right before when you say that, like, stand beside but not before. I think some people kind of take that notion and kind of think like, oh, like they're asking for me to like say on their behalf. It's like, no, they're asking for you to support them, but at the same time, do, amplify what they're saying if they do say something. And I think like, that goes into perspective with like what a good ally looks like, so a good ally will definitely center the perspectives of the oppressed, decentralize the dominant / privileged narratives, performative action, listening actively, respecting their lived experiences, and then also, providing the forms of support that are requested. So, like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, it's like instead of doing something that you assume it's going to help, kind of ask them directly how you can support them. So definitely all good points. I honestly feel like we are all good allies here. We definitely take those steps. But is there anything that y'all want to add that like what a good ally should look like in your perspective?
Yeah, just going back to like some of the points you just listed, like respecting their lived experiences. I think there's a lot of people my age, a lot of my friends of color, who they are confidently able to say they have not experienced racism before. And then I think I hear that a lot, like, okay, like, oh, people make such a big deal out of racism and misogyny, but I haven't actually experienced that. It's like, okay, well, you have to respect other people's lived experiences. So even if you haven't experienced an Asian hate crime in the same way that like other people have, you just have to understand that, it's very real for other people, and that doesn't make the situation less valid. And then going back to the whole idea of just like providing the forms of support that are requested, I think when a marginalized community is like outwardly asking, hey, don't do this thing, it's like super important for people to like not do that thing. So like one thing right now is on Twitter, a lot of Hawaiian natives are saying, please don't come to Hawaii right now. COVID is really bad. Our communities don't have the same resources to fight this virus. Please stop vacationing here. So many natives are begging like people to stop traveling there. Yet, I can think of so many people off the top of my head this summer who went there. And it's just like, okay, this oppressed group is telling you to not do this thing. Why continue to do that and harm them? So I think, reflecting about that is super, super important.
Definitely. Go ahead, James. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Oh, no, you're good. I just remember this, picking back off that. And this goes back to like performative social media actions. So last year during the Black Lives Matter movement, during the protests during, I think May, there was this social media trend of like posting up just like a black picture, like a blackout.
Yeah.
And that was like, I don't know who started that. You might have input, but either way, it was kind of destructive because it's blocked off, Black Lives Matter social media initiatives that like they couldn't communicate because of this trend that was blocking out instead of like other important information that couldn't get out.
Yeah, basically, just to clarify what you're saying, a lot of people had the issue of where news feeds and timelines were getting just spammed, not spammed, but getting filled with black squares, but real important information regarding the movement wasn't as visible as everybody else's black squares because it was a trend. So that was a way that it was actually detrimental to the movement rather than supportive. But
yeah. And speaking of like, performative and like actually helping with that, I think it kind of begs the question, so like when we already define like what a good ally looks like, right? So like in essence, something I want to back off to you two again, which you guys have been really amazing at, is like, and that's the case, what does a good ally not look like? I know it's kind of counterintuitive because we kind of already touched on it already, but like when I say that question, what's like the first thing you kind of think of that's like not a good thing? Yeah.
I think
Maya, you take it.
it's there's a lot. So I think the first one that comes to mind for me is the whole idea of like recognizing the intent versus the impact and being accountable for if you are doing something wrong, but the intent is there, like the positive intent is there, you still have to be accountable for like your wrongdoings. And I guess like the best way to describe that is, I think a lot of times the whole idea, the whole rhetoric regarding racism of like, oh, I don't see color, I don't see, I'm colorblind, like
Problematic.
everybody's the same to me, I think that rhetoric, a lot of people who use that, and also the whole concept of like all lives matter too, like using the phrase all lives matter. I know a lot of people who use those rhetorics, their intention is to be anti-racist, but it's so much deeper than that. People don't realize that the whole I don't see color thing really ignores the differences that exist between, different races and the racial disparities that are our reality, and saying everybody's the same, like, no, everybody's not the same. Please acknowledge that there are differences. We are different, and then the whole all lives matter thing is like, yeah, all lives do matter, true, but you can't ignore that the Black community right now is being particularly targeted worse than anybody else right now, and we need to be there to help them. And all lives matter kind of just invalidates the community that needs our help the most. So definitely understanding intent versus impact.
Yeah, and I just want to like really quickly respond to that, because I know mentioned from like your last episode, Mai, that you talked about like the Asian American community and like the anti-Blackness problem, where like there's a lot of like conflicts between communities, and I think that would kind of resonate too, because something that I've noticed like with the Asian American community is that there's always like, oh well, like this is their problem, we should not get involved with it, it's almost similar to the whole idea of like, oh, all lives matter, and it's almost like kind of like it's being very bystanderless. But I think something like, again, like you want to say, it's like you can say this, like for example, like you can say that like this is their own problem. However, like we've also been in this problem before, so like we should be helping them as well, and like we need to be focusing on them as well. So I think like there's a lot of, again, commonalities with like that rhetoric of like your intent versus your impact, because again, like people can always turn a blind eye and be like, that's not our business, or like we should include everybody and be inclusive. Yes, but there's a boundary and there's a limit to what that is and what that defines is, because it's a very situational, case by case for every situation. Retweet, y'all. That just took my voice away. But James, is there anything that you see that is like not a good ally in like your perspective?
Yeah, I feel like this is hard to explain, but I feel like an ally doesn't ever say they're an ally in like any explicit form. It's kind of behavior that speaks for itself. It's like, for example, if I'm good at something, then I don't ever like put my like say I'm good at it, right? It's something I do constantly. It's constant self-interrogation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think like, with that, it's just like, you gotta be able to like, understand it from a different perspective and be able to like know what you're doing as well, because some people just don't know what they're doing.
I guess like actions speak louder than words is.
It does. It does.
And
it does.
I bring that up because we're talking about like performative action on social media. So just my first thought.
Yeah, we know what we're all guilty of it a little bit. I know I've definitely caught myself referring to myself as an ally before, and me thinking about like, okay, what can I do to like actually show that? So it's okay if you're guilty of some of these things, but we're talking about it so we can kind of like hold our own selves accountable right now.
Yeah, and of course it's okay to be like held accountable, but it's more of like, importantly, it's like, how do we understand it and how can we change ourselves to better ourselves? For example, like I was also a part of like that whole problem when like I was like so-called ally, but the problem was is that like I never did my research. I just kind of like always just shared the thing. But I think what I've been doing now that's a lot more different is that I will now read these articles, read what I'm talking about, and then from there, if I truly believe in like what is going on and such, I will share it. And then if anyone ever asks me, I have the knowledge to understand, and I also speak and like tell like this is something that's a problem. We need to bring awareness to it, and then reach out to community members that also feel the same way, and somehow like kind of unify this whole like solidarity, if you know what I mean. Okay. Well, I
Yeah.
love the opinions, y'all. Oh, yes, James. Go ahead. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just gonna add, like, on top of that, like we have our opinions and whatnot, but when we're in these spaces, I think a good ally doesn't really assume their presence or opinion is necessary or desired. Like, again, if you have the mic, pass it off to someone, and a good ally just doesn't, speak over the people that you're trying to champion.
Retweet on that one. I love that. Thank you, James. Again, James, it's your first episode, but honestly, I feel like you're giving me so much wisdom. I swear to God, you should just take it away. But that being said, I do want to recognize the other points that are not being good allies. So assuming your presence or opinion is desired or necessary, treating people as a monolith. For example, you would treat the AAPI community as a monolith, speaking on one's behalf, and then providing conditional solidarity, saying, I would love to join you, for example, but don't think it's the right space for me. Any space is an open space as long as you have the right intention, like Maya said earlier. Referring yourself as an ally and speaking for yourself, intent versus impact, and then again, broader perspective. So saying that you don't see color and stuff like that are things that are very problematic, even though they seem like they're good intentions.
This is one last thing that I want to add that's not on the list. I just thought of this literally just now. But I think, if we find ourselves in situations where we are considered maybe the oppressor or we're the more privileged group out of like a certain situation, I think that being, like not being a good ally, or basically don't be so fragile if you're told to to be held accountable for something. I think a lot of people have privilege fragility when it comes to being called out on certain things. And I think that guilt and that fragility that we have surrounding our guilt that's very normal feeling. It's okay to feel like, oh my gosh, am I the oppressor? Am I doing something wrong? And then you act guilty and then you act defensive because you feel that guilt. But I think instead of internalizing that guilt, take it as and like, okay, learn from it. What can I do to be better? What can I do to help people, instead of like internalizing guilt and then like being defensive about the situation. So
yeah, the best thing you can do then is if you make a mistake, apologize. Like you said, internalize it, be better, and move on.
Yeah, literally that's it.
I definitely think that is something that we all are going to struggle with, honestly, as people, is that we're definitely going to internalize these things. But again, it's that confidence and that self-reflection that we take to reach out to people and ask for help. Because I know most people don't like to ask for help, but sometimes it's okay to ask, because you'd rather be in the right direction than go in the wrong direction and cause yourself to be something that's different turmoil. Yeah, thank you so much, y'all. But that being said, I think, a lot of our viewers and a lot of our listeners here are kind of wondering, like, I'm in VSA, like, how exactly can I like bring this back to like the VSA space? Like, this is definitely a big topic, and like, it's like, if you're a VSA board member, president, general body member, even, it's like, a question that I want to ask both of you is that, what can we do as members of VSA to, be a good ally and also like respect the spaces of like our other fellow minorities that also have a shared history with us as well?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind for me is definitely making offering resources available for your organization. So whether that be like resource sheets or like informational resources for like queer folks or people struggling with mental health, or people dealing with sexual assault or abuse, just having something for your members to refer back to. And that can also look like collaborating with maybe different departments of your university for educational workshops or events. So for example, at UIC, we have something called the Asian American Resource and Cultural Center, and they collab with organizations like VSA and also Greek organizations to host these discussion workshops called lunch boxes. And it's usually about stuff like this that we talk about here on our podcast. And it's basically a way for us to like introduce these important ideas into the VSA community with the help of experts. We're not all experts in social justice, right? So yeah, I would say there's that.
Nice, nice.
Yes,
How about you,
I
James?
second that.
Oh, okay.
Definitely reaching out to the leadership of more authoritative cultural or intersectional student groups. If you're trying to educate your constituents, I think that would be the move. There are probably a lot of resources on your campus that you don't even know about. Just have to do a bit of digging. But
Yeah, and also like I know a lot of us being leaders in VSA, our intention on campus is to spread cultural awareness and to spread Vietnamese pride and stuff like that, right? And to focus on Asian American issues. But it would show a lot. For example, if your organization, if your VSA supported a Black Student Union event and you guys went out to one of their culture shows and you guys supported their event and just being there and, thinking of ways that you can support other external organizations or other student organizations or other causes that aren't related to, your like to the culture that you're trying to promote on campus, but just like again that solidarity. Yeah.
Yeah, brief me on that. And honestly, I think I really want to like emphasize like the big part of like resources and also like doing a lot of joint like collaboration because in times like this, like we definitely again we're not experts and that's okay. Like we are always learning, we're always striving for feedback, we're always trying to better ourselves and be more aware of things. But it's okay to ask for help. Again, like we mentioned earlier, whether it's like you reach out to a certain organization that makes you be more knowledgeable, you share your experiences, or you honestly talk to like an expert that's maybe doing research or maybe like they're like a director of like a certain cultural like coordination. I think it's definitely important to reach out to these networks and be able to ask for their like opinions and also their stories and their facts because whether you know it or not, there's a lot of information out there that has still yet to be undug and discovered from us because this maybe only honestly be like 20-30% of what we're talking about, but it can go so much deeper. It can be systematic, it can be like historical. We may never know, but we won't know unless we push ourselves to know. So I leave you all with that. And another thing too is that for VSAs out there, is that I understand that most of us have the NGM program, which is also known as ACE, right? Something that has been like an idea that has been recently kind of like coming up is adding a non-binary option into the ACE program. Often than not, there's a lot of issues where, not issues, but more of like there's new upcomings where people are now starting to identify as they, them, ZZ, and also other identifications that are also very vast. So I think something to kind of realize is that the ACE program has a very traditional setting where it's always male, female, and that's it. But I think we need to come into a new playground where we think about the other pronouns and also the other identities and kind of include them, whether it's making an option on your form and saying that you can prefer non-binary or you can prefer not to say, and also things like that. An example that may be, I think it's for sure, but something that we've actually gotten from a resource from UVSA-Midwest is that the VSA at IUPUI, or also known as Indiana, has non-binary options. Oh my gosh, my tongue is twisted today. But having non-binary options for folks to kind of have the confidence to choose what they want, because this is a part of their identity as well. So definitely, those are all good resources. So again, just to recap, is reach out to folks, collaborate, make these resources cheap, and even consider changing a little bit of your programming that you may have already existed into your VSA or on the other organizations too, for those who may be listening from outside. So yeah, thank you so much, James and Maya, for that. So going back into resources, Maya, I know you really talked about like having resources, and thankfully we've got a bunch of resources that everyone here, our listeners and viewers, can view on their own time. We've actually made a new team URL that our lovely secretary David Fan has made for us. It goes tinyurl.com/2021 CoSR Project resources. If you go into there, you'll see our Google Sheet with all the resources that we have made provided for you and for free as well. So the resource that we have available today is the National School Climate Survey by GLSEN, also known as Gay, Lesbian, Straight Educational Network. It is made in 2019, where it has surveys of the information that James Harris talked about earlier about allyships and the statistics. A couple of other resources that we may have is Community Toolbox from the University of Kansas, Women of Color for Progress, A Guide to Being an Ally, and an article by Divya Iyer and it's titled My Role in a Social Change Ecosystem. So whenever you have a chance, give those definitely a look and a view and a read as well, when you can learn more about how to be a better ally. With that being said, we're heading towards the very end of our program tonight. So, James, I know this is our first time, but would you like to give us the honors to give us what our kudos will be tonight?
Yeah, we've got one today from David Tran to VSA-MI presidents. Thank you all so much for such a lovely retreat earlier this week. I'm very proud and excited to see what unique and extraordinary things you all have in store for this upcoming year.
I wish I knew who this David Tran was. He sounds really amazing, honestly, y'all. Oh man. And I think Maya, you have a surprise kudos, what I hear.
I just thought of it just now, guys. But I just want to give a cool shout out to Kenny Vo for successfully executing, the CPP campaign, the Dare to Care campaign that UVSA-Midwest was doing.
Nice.
And I want to shout out everybody who participated. And according to the email that I have right in front of me, you guys raised $2,000 and $2,150 for CPP. So shout out to UVSA-Midwest and all of who participated in Dare to Care. Cool.
I'm looking for that VSA award for best philanthropy outreach because we're doing an amazing job. And for those who may not know, actually, so UNASA has taken a new local direction with CPP. So our collective philanthropy project for the next upcoming term, which have already been announced to national news, is that we will now be working with the Asian Prisoner Support Committee, which is a new local beneficiary, which we're taking a new action and direction in, where we're working with Asian American incarcerated prisoners that are local to the United States and helping them get back into society. And based in Northern California and Oakland, California, that was definitely a tongue twister. We're looking forward to serving with them and being able to make a change, someone in our local community this time. And, this episode would not have been possible for our lovely behind the scenes folks. So Maya, you want to give them a special shout out?
Thank you guys. I mean, the usual gang. We have Richie, we have Molly, we have Ethan, we have Kang and Jennifer, and you guys, they work so diligently to support our efforts and pushing out this amazing content and, being our personal cheerleaders. So you guys, we love you guys.
Woo, much love. Ooh,
yeah.
But yes, thank you so much. And James, I want to give you the last thing before I give the closing remarks. But is there anything you want to say to our viewers, to your paparazzi fans out there? Is there anything you want to leave them off with before we close off the remarks?
Just thank you for taking the time and energy to listen to us. We really appreciate it.
Yes, we do. And honestly, we appreciate you, James, even though you have been our behind the scenes person, but it's finally good to see you out here in person. One day we'll see you in person. My hand is out there. My hand's out there reaching for you. But with that, we would like to say thank you to our viewers and listeners out there for sticking with us and being present during this conversation. We really love all of y'all's support and engagement, and honestly, just the spirit that you give us within. But the question is, what's next? Well, the next time you see us, we'll be putting a little twist into things, and we'll be bringing to you a more informal episode where the cohort will be getting together and doing some fun things that are totally unscripted. But until then, that was episode 4 in standing with other communities in solidarity. And until then, see y'all soon. Bye.
Bye.